My mother spent $85,000 turning my twin brother's graduation into a royal celebration while I stood beside the cake, like a guest no one remembered. That night, I left a goodbye note on her dresser. It said, "You forgot the wrong child." By dawn, every dirty secret in that house was awake, and the financial empire they thought they owned began to crumble. My name is Clara Sterling. I am 26 years old and a tax accountant. Actually, as of this very morning, I am officially a certified public accountant. I passed my final board exams with a score in the top 1% of the state. It was the culmination of years of grueling study, late nights fueled by cheap coffee, and scraping by on a junior accountant's salary. But on the Saturday evening of my licensing, I was not celebrating. I was wearing a plain black dress, carrying a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes through my parents' sprawling home in the affluent North Shore suburbs of Chicago, serving people who did not even know I lived there. The party was not for me. It was for my twin brother, Julian. Julian had just finished his Master of Business Administration from a mid-tier private college. In the Sterling household, Julian's achievements were treated like national holidays, while my milestones were treated like annoying footnotes. I remember walking into the kitchen at 8 o'clock that morning. I had the official email from the state board open on my phone. My hands were shaking with excitement. I had spent 4 years managing my parents' business accounts for free while putting myself through school. I walked up to my mother, who was barking orders at the floral delivery team. I told her I passed. I told her I was officially a CPA. She did not even look at the screen. She handed me a stack of cocktail napkins and told me to make sure the guest bathroom had fresh hand towels because Julian's friends were arriving at 5. That was the reality of being the invisible child. You stop noticing all the small ways they have already decided you do not matter. You stop expecting a seat at the table, and you just learn to serve the food. The living room was blindingly bright. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over 50 well-heeled guests. There were local real estate developers, insurance brokers, and country club socialites. The air smelled of expensive, catered roasted tenderloin and my mother's suffocating designer perfume. I navigated through the crowd, offering champagne to people wearing watches that cost more than my annual salary. My arms ached from the weight of the silver tray. My feet were blistered from running errands all day, but I kept my head down and did my job. My father, Richard, loved playing the part of the wealthy patriarch. He stood by the grand stone fireplace, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. He wore a custom, tailored suit that hid the fact that his insurance brokerage had been struggling for years. Appearances were everything to the Sterling family. Looking rich was far more important than actually being rich. At exactly 8 o'clock, my father tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter. The string quartet in the corner stopped playing. 50 faces turned toward the fireplace with expectant smiles. I stood near the kitchen doorway, holding my tray tight against my chest. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," my father announced. His voice boomed over the crowd, warm with rehearsed charm. "Tonight we are celebrating the future of the corporate world. We are celebrating my son." Julian stepped up beside him. Julian was wearing a navy suit, his golden blonde hair perfectly styled. He had our mother's bright blue eyes and her easy, entitled smile. He looked like the picture-perfect son. No one in that room knew that Julian had nearly failed out of his undergraduate program. No one knew that I was the one who tutored him through his finance classes, or that I had essentially written half of his final thesis just to keep my parents from screaming at me for not helping my brother. To them, he was a genius. My mother, Patricia, swept to the center of the room. She was radiant in a silk emerald gown, beaming with a pride I had never once seen directed at me. "Julian, darling, your father and I could not be more proud of the man you have become," she said. "You are destined for greatness. And to make sure you arrive at greatness in style, we have a little surprise for you. Go look out the front window." The crowd murmured in excitement. Julian rushed to the massive bay windows overlooking the pristine cobblestone driveway. The guests followed, parting like the Red Sea. I stayed frozen by the kitchen door. Sitting in the prime spot of the driveway, illuminated by the outdoor security lights, was a brand new midnight blue BMW SUV. It had a massive silver bow stuck to the roof. The sticker price on a car like that was easily $85,000. Julian let out a shout of pure joy. He spun around, ran back to my mother, and lifted her off her feet in a massive hug. People cheered. Some whistled. Camera flashes went off as guests documented the Sterling family's incredible generosity and perfect life. I stood in the shadows, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edges of the serving tray. $85,000. My car was a 10-year-old sedan with a failing transmission that my parents made me park 3 blocks away so it would not ruin the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I had asked them for a $2,000 loan last year to pay for my CPA review courses. My father had told me times were tight and that I needed to be more financially responsible. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my face into a blank mask. I was used to this. I was the spare child kept around for utility but never truly wanted. I stepped forward to collect empty glasses from a nearby table. That is when an older neighbor, Mrs. Gable, noticed me. She was a retired schoolteacher who lived 2 houses down, one of the few people who ever actually looked me in the eye. "Clara," she said warmly, reaching out to touch my arm. "I hardly recognized you standing back here. Didn't your mother tell me you had a big test this week? An accounting board exam or something?" I managed a small, genuine smile. "Yes, ma'am. I actually got the results this morning. I passed. I am officially a CPA." "Oh my goodness," Mrs. Gable gasped, her face lighting up. "That is a massive accomplishment. Why on earth are they not making a toast to you as well? 2 children hitting major milestones on the exact same day. Richard should be shouting it from the rooftops." Mrs. Gable turned toward the center of the room, raising her voice to get my father's attention. "Richard, Patricia, you kept a secret from us. Clara just told me she got her CPA license today." The conversations nearest to us died down. A few people turned to look at me. For a split second, a terrifying, foolish spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe my father would raise his glass to me. Maybe my mother would smile and say she was proud. Instead, my mother materialized beside us with the speed of a striking snake. Her smile was tight, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. "Oh yes," Patricia said smoothly, waving her hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. Clara finished her little bookkeeping test. It is nice that she has a stable trade, but let us not take the spotlight away from Julian's master's degree. Clara is just doing petty bookkeeping for small clients. Julian is going to be running boardrooms. The spark of hope in my chest turned to ash. Petty bookkeeping, a stable trade. She spoke about my grueling professional certification as if I had learned to fold napkins. Mrs. Gable looked taken aback. Her smile faltered. "Well, I think being a certified accountant is highly impressive," she said softly. My mother ignored her. She turned directly to me, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only I could hear. "What is wrong with you? Trying to steal your brother's thunder on his special night? You always have to make everything about yourself." I did not say a word. I did not defend myself. I just stared at the woman who gave birth to me and wondered how a mother could be so remarkably cruel to her own flesh and blood. Before I could process the humiliation, a loud crash echoed from the back patio. The sound of shattering crystal and boisterous male laughter pierced through the elegant music. Julian and 3 of his fraternity brothers had taken a bottle of champagne outside. One of them had knocked an entire tray of expensive crystal glasses off a stone pillar. The glass shattered across the imported Italian patio tiles. Julian did not apologize. He just laughed loudly and pointed at the mess. My mother did not miss a beat. She turned to me and snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, demanding exactly the way you would summon a disobedient dog. "Clara, get out there and clean that up before someone ruins their shoes," she ordered. "And bring the industrial broom. Do not just use a towel." I stood there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds where I looked at Julian laughing on the patio, at my father accepting congratulations for buying an $85,000 car, and at my mother staring at me with absolute contempt. I was a 26-year-old licensed professional. I had managed their business ledgers, filed their taxes, and saved them from IRS audits twice. And yet, in this house, I would only ever be the hired help. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said. I set my serving tray down on a side table. I walked through the kitchen, grabbed the heavy broom and a dustpan, and stepped out onto the cool night air of the patio. Julian's friends ignored me completely as I knelt on the hard stone tiles. I swept the broken shards of crystal into a pile. Women in designer gowns stepped over me, continuing their conversations without glancing down. Men in tailored suits laughed above my head. I was completely invisible. As I knelt there, picking up the broken pieces of my mother's expensive glasses, I realized something fundamental. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place at their table. I had bent myself into smaller and smaller shapes. I swallowed. My hurt, apologized for having feelings, and stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I believed that if I was useful enough, compliant enough, and perfect enough, they would eventually love me. But love is not a transaction. You cannot earn what should have been given freely. I dumped the broken glass into the outdoor trash bin. I brushed the dust off my plain black dress. I did not know it yet, but the humiliation on that patio was the final push I needed. Because later that night, I would walk into my father's home office to find a spare tablecloth. I would find his heavy steel safe left unlocked. And what I was about to discover inside that safe would transform me from a victim into a force of nature. They thought I was just doing petty bookkeeping. They were about to find out exactly how dangerous a petty bookkeeper can be. I threw the broken pieces of my mother's expensive crystal into the heavy outdoor trash bin. The sound of glass shattering against plastic felt like the perfect metaphor for my place in this family. I dusted off my plain black dress and walked back inside the house. The kitchen was hot and smelled like roasted garlic and spilled wine. My mother intercepted me before I could even wash my hands. She told me the dessert buffet was a mess and instructed me to go to my father's study to fetch the spare silk tablecloths she kept in his supply closet. I did not argue. I just nodded and walked away from the music, away from the loud laughter, and away from Julian showing off his $85,000 graduation present. The hallway leading to my father's home office was lined with expensive framed photographs. Julian hitting a home run in Little League, Julian at his high school prom, Julian standing with my parents during his undergraduate commencement. I walked past a decade of my brother's life proudly displayed on the walls. There was one picture of me tucked near the baseboard, a blurry candid taken when I was 12. I pushed open the heavy oak door of the study. The room smelled of aged leather, expensive scotch, and my father's favorite imported cigars. It was a room meticulously designed to intimidate. It was designed to make visitors feel small and make Richard Sterling feel like a titan of industry. I walked straight to the mahogany supply closet in the corner. I found the silk tablecloths neatly folded and smelling of lavender. I draped them over my arm and turned to leave. That is when I saw it. Behind the massive desk, a framed painting of a hunting scene usually hung flush against the wall. Tonight, the heavy ornate frame was swung wide open on its concealed hinges. Behind it was my father's digital wall safe, and the thick steel door was cracked open by about an inch. My father was a man who obsessed over security, but he was also a man who drank too much single malt scotch when he was busy celebrating himself. The $85,000 car, the endless toasts, the excessive praise for Julian. It had all made him careless. I stood there in the quiet room, staring at the sliver of dark space behind the heavy steel door. A normal person would have pushed the door shut, spun the dial, and walked back to the party. But I was not just a daughter fetching linens. I was the unpaid accountant for this family. I had spent 4 years balancing my father's struggling insurance brokerage books. I knew exactly how tight money was. I knew my mother's platinum credit cards were constantly hovering near their maximum limits. I knew my father had taken out a second mortgage on this very house just to keep up his country club appearances. So, where did an $85,000 lump sum come from? The question gnawed at my instincts. I set the silk tablecloths down on the leather armchair. I walked around the massive desk. My heart was thumping hard against my ribs. I told myself I was just going to close the safe door, but as I reached for the cold steel handle, I saw a thick manila folder resting right at the front of the safe's top shelf. Stamped across the top of the folder was the blue logo of my personal bank, not my father's corporate bank, not my mother's private wealth management firm, my bank, the exact institution I had used since I was 18 years old to carefully, meticulously build my own financial independence. My hands trembled as I reached into the safe and pulled the thick folder out. It was heavy. It felt like holding a brick of solid lead. I sat down in my father's oversized executive chair and flipped open the cover. I am a certified public accountant. I look at complex financial statements, loan origination documents, and amortization schedules every single day of my life. I do not need a lawyer to translate bank jargon for me. I read numbers the way other people read simple English. The very top document was a loan disbursement confirmation. The amount was exactly $85,000. The funds had been wired directly to a luxury automotive dealership in downtown Chicago just 3 days ago. The memo line read, "Julian Sterling graduation vehicle." But that was not the part that made the blood run cold in my veins. I looked at the top of the page to see the origination account. The money did not come from a savings account. It did not come from a liquid asset fund. It came from a home equity line of credit, commonly known as a HELOC. For those who might not know, a HELOC is a type of loan where you borrow money against the equity of a property you already own. It is basically a second mortgage. You put the property up as collateral to the bank. If you do not pay back the loan, the bank seizes the property. I stared at the bold black ink on the page. I knew my parents had no equity left in their primary residence. They had drained it years ago to pay for Julian's expensive private college tuition and my mother's luxurious vacations. So what property was securing this massive impulsive loan? I quickly flipped to the second page, scanning the collateral property description. My eyes locked onto the address and my breathing stopped entirely. It was a commercial townhouse located in a highly desirable neighborhood downtown. It was a property that my late grandfather, a quiet and observant man who always saw exactly how my parents treated me, had transferred into my name through an ironclad trust when I turned 21. It was my only real asset. It was my safety net. It was the foundation I was using to build my entire future. And right there on the bank document, it was listed as the sole collateral for a massive rolling line of credit. I flipped through the pages faster, my breathing turning shallow and sharp. This $85,000 withdrawal for the luxury car was just the latest transaction. I found a detailed ledger spanning the last 4 years. The exact 4 years Julian had been pursuing his master's degree. I saw a withdrawal for $20,000 dated August 2020. I saw another for $15,000 just before Julian's spring break trip to Europe. I saw thousands of dollars pulled out in random greedy increments. $40,000 here, $12,000 there. The total balance owed on the loan was staggering. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. The equity of my grandfather's historic building had been hollowed out, scooped out from the inside like a pumpkin, leaving nothing but a fragile, debt-ridden shell. I looked at the high interest rates. I looked at the aggressive payment schedules. I felt physically sick. The room started to spin. My parents had been using my perfect credit score. I had worked 3 exhausting jobs during my college years just to graduate debt-free. I had lived on instant noodles and skipped social events to pay every single bill on time. I had protected my financial name with everything I had. Because I knew deep down that I would never have a safety net from my parents. I knew I had to be my own protector, and my parents had weaponized my hard work to fund the lavish, lazy lifestyle of their golden child. If this massive loan went into default, the bank would not go after Richard and Patricia Sterling. They would go after me. The commercial townhouse would be foreclosed and seized. My credit score would be obliterated. And as a newly licensed CPA, a massive default and potential bankruptcy would trigger an immediate ethical review by the state board. I could lose my license. I could lose my career. I could lose the very life I had spent 26 years fighting so hard to build. But how did they do it? I owned the building solely. My parents were not on the deed. They were not authorized co-signers. I frantically dug deeper into the thick stack of papers until I found the original master loan agreement. It was dated 4 years ago. I stared at the borrower signature line at the bottom of the long page of legal text. There, written in smooth dark blue ink, was my name, Clara Joanne Sterling. I traced the letters with my trembling index finger. The handwriting was incredibly convincing. The sharp curve of the C, the slight slant of the J. Someone had practiced this over and over. Someone had spent hours studying my signature on the tax documents I had prepared for them, mastering every loop and line until they could replicate it flawlessly. It was a meticulous, cold-blooded forgery. And standing right next to my forged signature was the signature of the primary guarantor, Richard Sterling, my own father. He had walked into a bank branch, sat across from a loan officer, and presented fraudulent documents with my forged signature to secure a massive line of credit against my property. He had stolen my identity, and my mother had absolutely known about it. I found email printouts tucked in the very back of the folder. Correspondence between my father and the bank, carbon copying my mother's personal email address. They had coordinated the cash withdrawals together. They had discussed how to hide the physical bank mail from me. They had literally joked in one email thread about how easy it was to bypass the security verification process because I had set up their corporate accounts and the bank managers trusted our family name. I sat back in the heavy leather chair. The muffled sounds of the celebration drifted through the thick oak door. I could hear the faint thumping bass of the music. I could hear distant, arrogant laughter. Julian was probably out there right now, leaning against the hood of his $85,000 stolen car, accepting the admiration of 50 wealthy guests. My mother was probably standing next to him, beaming with pride, playing the role of the devoted and successful matriarch. And my father was pouring another glass of expensive scotch, comfortable in the knowledge that he had successfully maintained his grand illusion of wealth. They had sacrificed me. That was the brutal, undeniable truth echoing in the quiet of the study. They did not just favor my brother. They did not just overlook me. Overlooking someone is passive. What they had done to me was active. It was predatory. They had looked at my life, at my hard work, at the one precious gift my grandfather had given me to keep me safe, and they had decided that Julian's comfort was worth my complete destruction. They viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be mined, an asset to be liquidated, a disposable shield to protect their golden boy from the reality of their own financial failures. The deep sadness that had weighed on my chest for 26 years evaporated in that instant. The desperate, pathetic need for their approval, the lingering hope that if I just swept up enough broken glass, they would finally love me, it all vanished completely. I did not feel heartbroken anymore. I felt something else entirely. I felt a cold, absolute, terrifying clarity. I looked at the forged signature on the loan document again. My father thought he was incredibly clever. He thought because I was the quiet, compliant daughter, I would never find out. Or worse, he thought that if I did find out, I would be too weak and too desperate for family unity to do anything about it. He assumed I would just take the financial burden, just like I took the serving trays and the brooms. He forgot one crucial detail. He forgot that he had forced me to become an expert in financial tracking. He forgot that I knew exactly how to dismantle a fraudulent ledger. He forgot that a certified public accountant does not just balance books. We know how to uncover systemic fraud. We know how to follow the money trail. And we know exactly what evidence the authorities need to put a white-collar criminal in a federal prison. I held the forged document in my hand. The paper felt crisp and lethal. The $85,000 car was not a gift. It was a crime scene, and this study with its expensive cigars and leather chairs was ground zero. The party outside was still raging loudly. They were completely unaware that the foundation of their entire lives had just been pulled out from under them by the invisible daughter they had pushed into the shadows. I stood in the center of my father's study with the forged loan document trembling in my hand. For 26 years, I had been the perfect compliant daughter. I had been the girl who always swallowed her feelings so my parents could shine their spotlight entirely on Julian. I was the one who scrubbed the floors, balanced the checkbooks, and faded into the background. A normal person in this situation would have collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug. A normal daughter would have burst into tears, marched out to the patio, and screamed at her parents in front of all 50 wealthy guests. She would have demanded an explanation. She would have wanted to know how the people who brought her into this world could steal her identity and mortgage her future just to buy a luxury vehicle for her twin brother. But I did not cry. My eyes were completely dry. My chest felt hollowed out, but the empty space left behind was filling rapidly with something entirely new. It was a cold, sharp focus. I am an accountant. My entire profession is built on logic precision and leaving a clear paper trail. My father had assumed I was weak. He had mistaken my lifelong silence for stupidity. He thought I would be too desperate for family approval to ever fight back against his financial crimes. He assumed I would simply take the hit, just like I took the serving trays and the brooms. He was wrong. I was not going to make a scene. A scene is a temporary burst of emotion that fades by morning. I was going to execute a permanent dismantling of the chains they had wrapped around my life. I pulled my phone out of my dress pocket. I turned off the flash and silenced the camera sound to ensure no one walking past the study would hear a thing. The heavy oak door was closed tightly, muting the loud laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses from the party outside. I spread the thick manila folder out on my father's polished mahogany desk. One by one, I began to photograph the evidence. I photographed the loan disbursement confirmation showing the $85,000. I photographed the fraudulent ledger detailing 4 years of massive withdrawals that funded Julian's lavish lifestyle. I took clear, focused pictures of the printed email threads where my mother and father casually discussed hiding the bank correspondence from me. They had plotted this like a business transaction. My hands stopped shaking the moment I started working. I treated this exactly like I would treat a hostile corporate audit. Every page was a piece of ammunition. I made sure the lighting was perfect from the desk lamp. I made sure every single number date and signature was perfectly legible on my screen. When I reached the final page, the document bearing the meticulous forgery of my signature guaranteeing a massive home equity line of credit against my commercial townhouse, I did not just take a picture. I carefully slipped the original notarized signature page out of the stack. I folded it neatly and placed it deep inside the inner pocket of my black serving dress. Without the original wet signature, the bank would have a much harder time defending the validity of the loan once I reported the identity fraud. I returned the rest of the documents to the manila folder. I placed the folder back onto the top shelf of the digital wall safe, positioning it exactly as I had found it. I gently pushed the heavy steel door closed and spun the dial, hearing the mechanical click that locked it tight. I grabbed the edge of the silk tablecloth I had originally come to fetch and wiped my fingerprints off the safe handle and the desk. My father would not know I had been inside his safe tonight. He would wake up tomorrow thinking his perfect crime was still safely hidden. He would not know his entire world had just unraveled. I left the folded tablecloth sitting on the leather armchair. I walked out of the study and slipped up the back staircase, completely avoiding the main foyer where the party was still going strong. The hallway upstairs was dark and quiet. I walked into my bedroom. It was a small room at the very end of the hall, plainly decorated, holding very little warmth. It looked like a temporary guest room because, in truth, I had always been treated like a guest in this house. I pulled 2 large suitcases from the top shelf of my closet. I gave myself exactly 30 minutes to pack up my entire life. I moved with a strange, robotic efficiency. I did not take anything they had bought me over the years. I left the few cheap pieces of jewelry my mother had gifted me for past birthdays sitting untouched on the dresser. I only packed the clothes I had purchased with my own money from my junior accounting jobs. I packed my laptop, my financial textbooks, my official CPA licensing paperwork, and a small wooden box of photographs of my late grandfather. He was the man who had left me that commercial townhouse in his trust. He was the only person in this family who had ever truly tried to protect me, and they had violated his memory by turning his gift into a weapon against me. I zipped the suitcases shut. It took exactly 22 minutes. I stood up and looked around the empty room. I waited to feel a pang of sadness or a wave of grief for the childhood I was leaving behind, but I felt absolutely nothing. No nostalgia, no regret, no fear. I was shedding a skin that had never fit me in the first place. But physical packing was only the first step. Before I could leave this house forever, I needed to lock down my digital life and cut their access to my skills. I sat on the edge of my stripped mattress and opened my laptop. The blue glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. I logged into my personal banking portal first. I immediately locked all of my personal credit cards and debit cards. I placed a strict high-level fraud alert on my social security number with all 3 major credit bureaus. If my father tried to open another line of credit tomorrow, or if he tried to transfer any more debt into my name, he would be blocked instantly. The digital walls were up. Next, I opened a new browser window and logged into the cloud-based accounting software for my father's insurance brokerage. For 4 grueling years, I had managed his books entirely for free because, as my mother always said, family is supposed to help family. My father was terrible with money, and his business was constantly teetering on the edge of failure due to his careless spending and poor record keeping. I had spent countless weekend hours balancing his messy ledgers, managing his complex payroll system, and ensuring his quarterly taxes were filed perfectly to keep the IRS away from his door. I was listed as the primary administrative user on all of their corporate accounts. I held the digital keys to his entire livelihood. Not anymore. With deliberate, methodical keystrokes, I initiated a complete digital severing. I transferred all the raw data to a secure external drive for my own records, just in case they tried to blame me for their future financial ruin. Then, I systematically removed my name from their list of authorized users across every platform. I revoked their administrative access to any software licenses that were tied to my personal email address. I changed the master passwords to randomized strings of text and surrendered the administrator rights to a generic company email they rarely checked. I completely unlinked my identity, my professional credentials, and my personal liability from the Sterling family business. If my father wanted to check his payroll on Monday morning or issue vendor payments or run a profit report, he would find himself completely locked out of the streamlined system I had built for him. He would have to hire an actual accounting firm and pay them thousands of dollars just to untangle the mess he was about to be in. I watched the progress bar on my screen reach 100%. The screen flashed a green notification confirming that my administrative removal was successfully completed. The connection was permanently severed. They had treated me like free disposable help for the last time. I closed the laptop and slipped it into my carry-on bag. There was only one thing left to do. I carried my 2 heavy suitcases out into the hallway and set them down near the top of the main staircase. I walked slowly down the plush, carpeted hall to my parents' master bedroom. The door was wide open. The room was immaculate, smelling strongly of the expensive floral perfume my mother wore, like a shield of upper-class status. I walked over to her pristine mirrored vanity. It was cluttered with expensive anti-aging creams, diamond earrings, and velvet jewelry boxes. I pulled a small notepad and a black pen from my pocket. I did not want to write a long, emotional letter detailing my heartbreak. Narcissists feed on your pain. They use your long, tear-stained paragraphs of hurt feelings as proof that you are unstable, dramatic, and difficult. They use your emotions to spin a narrative where they are the victims of an ungrateful child. I wanted to give her exactly what she deserved. Nothing but cold, terrifying certainty. I uncapped the pen. I did not hesitate. I wrote exactly 2 sentences on the thick white paper. You forgot the wrong child, and I just remembered who I am. I placed the pen down. I left the note propped up against her most expensive perfume bottle, positioned right in the center of the mirror, where she would see it the very moment she walked in to take off her makeup tonight. I looked at the note for a long second. It looked small on that massive vanity, but it felt like a heavy steel door slamming shut. It felt like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I walked back out to the hallway, grabbed my suitcases by their handles, and carried them silently down the back stairs. The kitchen was still empty, smelling of roasted meat and discarded appetizers. The sounds of the party were much louder down here. I could hear Julian's booming voice drifting through the open patio doors, bragging to a group of men about a high-level executive job interview he had lined up for next week. He sounded so incredibly confident, utterly oblivious to the fact that his new luxury car, his expensive suit, and his entire arrogant persona were financed by a felony committed against his own sister. I slipped out the side door by walking quickly through the deep shadows of the manicured side lawn. The cool, crisp night air hit my face, and it felt amazing against my flushed skin. I walked 3 blocks down the dimly lit street to where my mother had forced me to park my 10-year-old sedan so it would not ruin the visual aesthetic of her wealthy neighborhood. I threw my suitcases into the trunk and slammed it shut. The metallic sound echoed loudly down the quiet suburban street, but I did not care if anyone heard me anymore. I got into the driver's seat and put the keys in the ignition. The old engine sputtered for a second, protesting the cold, before roaring to life. I gripped the steering wheel. I did not look in the rearview mirror at the massive glowing house in the distance. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. As I drove onto the main highway, putting miles between myself and the North Shore suburbs, I rolled down the window. The wind rushed into the car, loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. For 26 years, I had been the invisible child, the unpaid servant, the disposable asset meant to prop up a golden boy. But tonight, the invisible child was gone. I vanished into the dark, taking their entire financial lifeline, their stolen security, and their perfect illusion right along with me. I woke up the next morning on a stiff mattress in a cheap motel near the interstate. It was a room that cost $45 a night and smelled faintly of industrial bleach and stale coffee. My mother would have taken one look at the peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, and the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom, and she would have fainted from sheer horror. But to me, as the early morning sunlight filtered through the thin, dusty curtains, that room was the most beautiful place on earth. For the first time in 26 years, I woke up without a tight, heavy knot of anxiety in my chest. I did not have to rush downstairs to brew my father's specialty imported coffee. I did not have to steam my mother's silk blouses or listen to Julian complain about how exhausted he was from sleeping until noon. I was completely alone, and I was completely free. I sat up and reached for my phone on the cheap wooden nightstand. The screen was dark. I had turned it off completely before driving away from the mansion last night, needing just a few hours of absolute silence. I took a deep breath, prepared my mind for the digital explosion I knew was waiting for me, and held down the power button. The phone vibrated violently in my hand the second it connected to the cellular network. Notifications flooded the screen in a relentless flashing wave. 27 missed calls, 42 text messages, 14 voicemails. The numbers kept climbing as the network caught up with the absolute chaos I had left behind in the North Shore suburbs. I did not listen to them right away. I got dressed, bought a black coffee from a gas station down the street, and drove straight into downtown Chicago. I had an appointment at 9 a.m. with David Harrison. David was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm that specialized in financial fraud and corporate litigation. He was not a cheap lawyer. He was a shark in a perfectly tailored suit, the kind of man who dismantled arrogant white-collar criminals before his lunch break. I had researched his firm months ago for a corporate client at my accounting job and saved his contact information. I never in my wildest dreams thought I would need his services to protect myself from my own parents. I sat in the plush leather chair in David's massive corner office. The room smelled of expensive, polished wood and fresh espresso. Through the massive glass windows, the Chicago skyline stretched out against a cool gray morning sky. David sat across from me, his hands steepled together, his sharp eyes fixed on the thick manila folder I had placed on his desk. Before we look at the documents, I told him, I need you to hear something. I need you to hear what it sounds like when a family realizes they can no longer use their favorite victim. I placed my phone on the center of his polished desk, turned the volume all the way up, and tapped the first voicemail. The first message was timestamped at 7:15 in the morning. It was my mother. Her voice was not panicked. It was laced with that familiar, grating annoyance she always used when I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning or failed to arrange the floral centerpieces exactly to her liking. "Clara, where on earth are you?" my mother's voice demanded through the speaker. "I found this ridiculous little note on my vanity. You forgot the wrong child." "What kind of dramatic nonsense is this? You are a grown woman acting like a spoiled teenager." "Your father is absolutely furious. Julian's friends left a massive mess in the guest bedrooms last night, and you are supposed to be here managing the cleaning service. You need to come home right now and stop this childish tantrum. We are a respectable family, and we do not behave this way. Call me the second you get this message." I paused the recording. I looked at David. He did not say a word. He just nodded slowly for me to continue. "She thought it was just a tantrum," I explained quietly. "She thought I was just having an emotional breakdown because I was jealous of Julian's party and his expensive new car. She had no idea I had been inside the study. She had no idea the digital locks on their business accounts were already in place." I played the second voicemail. It was timestamped an hour later at 8:20. This time, it was Julian. "Clara, what the hell did you do to the accounts?" Julian's voice was loud, frantic, and echoing slightly, like he was pacing back and forth in a large, empty room. "I am at the insurance broker trying to set up the premium policy for my new car so I can drive it today. The card declined. My personal card declined. Then I tried the corporate card, and that declined too. The agent is looking at me like I am some kind of broke fraud. I am sitting here completely humiliated because of you. Fix this right now. Log in and authorize the payments. You are ruining the best weekend of my life." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. That was the exact moment the golden boy realized his gold was completely gone. Julian had never paid for a single thing in his entire life. My parents had handed him the world on a silver platter, but they had bought that platter using my pristine credit history. When I severed my name from their accounts the night before, the bank automatically froze their massive lines of credit due to suspicious activity and sudden administrative changes. The endless well of money had dried up instantly, and Julian was left standing at an insurance agency with a useless piece of plastic, unable to even drive his $85,000 graduation present. But the real turning point was the third voicemail. It came in at 8:45. It was my father. The tone of his voice had changed completely. There was no annoyance. There was no arrogant, commanding presence. His breathing was heavy, fast, and shallow into the receiver. He sounded exactly like a man who had just opened a heavy steel safe, reached for a familiar stack of forged financial documents, and realized the original signature page was missing. He had finally realized that the quiet, obedient daughter had taken the murder weapon directly from the crime scene. "Clara," my father's voice was a harsh, terrified whisper. "Where are the papers? You know exactly what papers I am talking about." You have no idea the kind of fire you are playing with right now. You think you are smart because you passed some little accounting test. You are nothing. You are a little girl who does not understand how the real world works. You bring those documents back to this house right now. If you do not come home and fulfill your duty to this family, I will disown you. Do you hear me? I will wipe your name from this family completely. You will have nothing and no one. Bring the papers back. Now." The voicemail clicked and ended. The silence in the law office was heavy and thick. I looked at David Harrison. He was leaning back in his executive chair, his eyes narrowed, evaluating the situation with the calm precision of a seasoned predator. "He threatened to disown me," I said softly, breaking the silence. He threatened to take away the family name, the very family name that he just used to commit a felony and steal my future. David picked up the original signature page from the desk. He examined the dark blue ink, the forged loops and slants that were meant to look exactly like my handwriting. Then, he looked at the bank disbursement forms, showing the $85,000 wired directly to the luxury car dealership. "They expected you to be terrified," David said quietly, setting the paper down. "They relied on your lifelong fear of abandonment. They thought the threat of losing your family would force you to quietly accept the debt, return the documents, and cover up their crime to keep the peace." "They were right about one thing," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I was terrified of losing them for 26 years. I spent my entire life making myself as small as possible so they would not throw me away. I washed their dishes. I balanced their books. I hid in the shadows so Julian could shine under the spotlight. But last night, standing in that study, holding the proof that they had mortgaged my entire life just to buy him a toy, I realized something. You cannot be abandoned by people who never really claimed you in the first place." I pushed the rest of the file across the desk toward the lawyer. "I do not want to negotiate, David. I do not want to send them a warning letter. I do not want a private settlement to keep this quiet and protect their country club reputation. My father committed identity fraud to secure a massive line of credit against my commercial property. My mother knew about it and actively coordinated the spending. They did this knowing full well it could destroy my accounting career and push me into bankruptcy." David nodded slowly. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and uncapped his heavy silver pen. "If we file this formally, Clara, there is absolutely no going back. The bank will launch an immediate federal investigation. The police will be involved. Your father could face significant prison time for wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. The luxury car will be seized. Their personal assets will be frozen indefinitely during the investigation. It will be a public, humiliating, and devastating process for your family. Are you absolutely certain you want to cross that line today?" I looked out the massive window at the sprawling city below. Somewhere out there in the wealthy suburbs, my mother was probably pacing the hardwood floors of her massive kitchen, cursing my name to anyone who would listen. Julian was probably screaming at my father to fix the credit cards so he could go show off to his friends. My father was probably pouring himself a very large glass of scotch, sweating through his expensive shirt, trying to figure out how to lie his way out of a forged signature. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the obedient, invisible daughter to come home, hand over the evidence, and apologize for making a fuss. I turned back to David and met his eyes directly. "They crossed the line 4 years ago when they forged my name," I said. "I am just holding them accountable for the trip. File the lawsuit, David. File it today. Report the fraud to the bank and hand the evidence over to the authorities. Let them burn." David smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous, highly professional smile. He reached for his desk phone and pressed a button to call his paralegal. "Sarah," David said into the speaker, "I need you to clear my afternoon schedule. We are preparing an immediate civil filing for identity theft and financial fraud, and we need to draft a formal report for the Financial Crimes Division of the Police Department." He hung up the phone and began sorting through the documents I had brought. I sat back in the leather chair and took a deep, cleansing breath. My heart was not racing anymore. My hands were perfectly still. For the first time in my life, I felt a profound, untouchable sense of peace. My parents had built their entire empire on the arrogant assumption that I would always be their silent victim. They thought they could mortgage my future to buy their golden child a luxury life. They thought I would value the illusion of a happy family more than my own survival. But as I sat in that law office listening to the sound of David Harrison organizing the evidence that would tear their lives apart, I realized they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had taught me how to read the numbers. They had taught me how to trace the money. They had trained me to be the very accountant who would eventually audit their crimes. My father said he would disown me if I did not come home. But he was about to learn a very harsh lesson about how the real world works. You cannot disown someone who has already fired you. The panic had just begun in the Sterling household, but by tomorrow morning, that panic was going to turn into an absolute nightmare. Tuesday morning arrived with a cold gray drizzle washing over the Chicago skyline. For most people, the gloomy weather would be depressing, but to me, it felt like a clean slate. Walking into the sleek downtown high-rise of my accounting firm, I felt a sense of profound sanctuary. My world was built on logic. It was a world governed by strict rules, balanced ledgers, and undeniable facts. In the accounting profession, there is no room for emotional manipulation or gaslighting. A number is either right or it is wrong. My firm was located on the 32nd floor. It was a highly respected corporate tax and auditing firm known for its rigorous standards. The managing partner was a man named Mr. Reynolds. He was a strict, fiercely principled man in his late 50s who expected absolute perfection from his team. He was the kind of boss who would fire a junior associate for a careless rounding error because he believed that our clients trusted us with their financial lives, and that trust was sacred. I had spent 2 years working under his exacting leadership, proving my dedication day after day, earning his quiet respect, and finally passing my CPA exams. This firm was my safe haven. But when you cut off a toxic family, they do not just let you walk away. When narcissists lose control over their favorite victim, they do not apologize or reflect on their actions. They attack. They try to destroy your credibility so that when you finally tell the truth, no one will believe you. Because my parents and my brother could not reach me on my phone, they decided to strike at the only thing I had left. They decided to destroy my career. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a corporate tax filing when Brenda, our human resources director, walked into my cubicle. She looked extremely uncomfortable. "Clara," she said softly, keeping her voice low so the other accountants would not hear. "Mr. Reynolds needs to see you in the main glass conference room right now. It is urgent." I felt a cold prickle of intuition at the base of my neck. I saved my spreadsheet, locked my computer screen, and followed Brenda down the long carpeted hallway. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the main conference room, I saw them. My mother, Patricia, was sitting at the massive oak table, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a crumpled tissue. She was wearing a conservative beige sweater, looking every inch the fragile, heartbroken matriarch. Sitting right beside her was Julian, wearing a crisp suit and an expression of deep, solemn concern. He actually reached out and rubbed our mother's back as I approached the door. Mr. Reynolds was sitting at the head of the table. His expression was grim, his posture rigid. Brenda opened the door for me and gestured for me to sit on the opposite side of the table facing my family. I did not flinch. I walked in, pulled out my leather chair, and sat down with my back straight. I did not greet them. I simply looked directly at Mr. Reynolds and waited. "Clara, Mr. Reynolds," began, his voice heavy with professional caution. "Your mother and your brother showed up at our reception desk a few minutes ago. They asked to speak with me regarding a severe family emergency. They have brought some very concerning allegations to my attention. Allegations that directly impact your standing as a newly licensed certified public accountant at this firm." I kept my eyes on my boss. "I understand, sir. Please tell me what they said." My mother let out a small dramatic sob. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that practically begged for an audience. "Clara, please come home," she cried, her voice shaking with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "We know you are unwell. You do not have to hide this from us anymore. We just want to get you the psychiatric help you need." I watched her perform. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I had not spent 26 years living behind the curtain, I might have actually believed she was a terrified, loving mother. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but bound by his professional duties. "Clara, your mother has informed me that you have been experiencing a severe mental breakdown over the past few weeks. She stated that last night, in a manic episode, you illegally locked them out of their own family business accounts that you managed." Julian chimed in, his voice thick with fake sympathy. "Mr. Reynolds, we are so incredibly worried. Clara has always been a little unstable, always jealous of my accomplishments. I just graduated with my master's degree this weekend, and she completely snapped. She vanished in the middle of the night." My mother leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the polished table. "Mr. Vance, we did not want to involve your firm, but we had no choice. Because Clara locked us out of the corporate ledgers, we cannot verify our balances. We have strong reason to believe she might have embezzled thousands of dollars from our family business to fund this manic escape. She should not be handling the finances of your corporate clients. We are telling you this to protect your firm from liability." The trap snapped shut. The brilliance of their cruelty was breathtaking. They knew they could not just call the police and say I ran away because I was a grown woman. But by coming to my employer, playing the role of concerned family members, and planting the word embezzlement, they were holding my entire future hostage. In the financial sector, an accusation of theft, even within a private family business, is a death sentence. The state board investigates any hint of financial impropriety. Mr. Reynolds looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a reaction. "Clara," he said sternly, "you know our firm policy. Any accusation of financial misconduct requires an immediate unpaid suspension pending a full internal investigation. Furthermore, if your family files a formal police report for embezzlement, I am legally obligated to report the matter to the state licensing board. Your CPA license could be suspended by the end of the day. Is there anything you want to say before I call security to escort you off the premises?" My mother gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk behind her tissue. She was waiting for me to break. She expected the invisible, compliant daughter to burst into tears, fall to pieces, and beg for mercy. She thought I would immediately promise to unlock their accounts and cover up their massive fraud just to save my job. She wanted me to surrender. I took a slow, deep breath. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a sleek silver USB drive. I placed it gently in the center of the heavy oak table. The small metal drive gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Reynolds," I said, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying calm, "I am not experiencing a mental breakdown. I am the victim of a coordinated, malicious financial crime committed by the two people sitting across from you." My mother's fake tears stopped instantly. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. I looked directly into my boss's eyes. Last night, I discovered that my father, Richard Sterling, forged my signature to secure a massive home equity line of credit against a commercial property that I solely own. He pulled $85,000 out of my equity to purchase a luxury vehicle for my brother's graduation present. What you will find on this drive is a certified digital copy of the loan disbursement documents. You will also find a preliminary analysis from an independent handwriting expert confirming my signature was forged. The color began to drain from my mother's face. Julian's mouth opened slightly, his confident posture crumbling in real time. I locked them out of the family business accounts because I am legally untangling my name from their fraudulent activities. I continued my words hitting the room like physical blows. I have already filed a formal identity theft report with the Chicago Police Department and the fraud division of my bank. Mr. Reynolds sat perfectly still. The strict principled accountant was processing the information rapidly. He looked at the USB drive, then slowly turned his gaze toward my mother. My mother tried to salvage her narrative. Her voice pitched higher, laced with genuine panic now. "Mr. Reynolds, do not listen to her. She is lying. She is making all of this up because she is sick and trying to deflect blame." I did not argue with her. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket. I unlocked the screen, opened my audio files, and pressed play on the recording I had saved from that morning. I turned the volume all the way up, so my father's desperate, angry voice echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. "Clara, you have no idea what you are doing." My father's recorded voice hissed through the speaker. "You bring those documents back to this house right now. If you do not come home and fulfill your duty to this family, I will disown you. Do you hear me? I will wipe your name from this family completely. You will have nothing and no one. Bring the papers back. Now." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was suffocating. "There is the proof of the theft," I said quietly. He realized I took the original forged signature page from his safe, and he left me a voicemail demanding the evidence back. "I have retained David Harrison as my legal counsel to pursue a civil lawsuit for identity theft and financial damages. I am not a risk to this firm, Mr. Reynolds. I am an accountant who caught a thief." Mr. Reynolds stared at my mother and brother. The professional courtesy he had shown them 5 minutes earlier was completely gone. His face had hardened into a mask of absolute icy disgust. He was a man who dedicated his life to financial integrity, and he was currently sitting across from two people who had just tried to weaponize his firm to cover up a felony. "Mrs. Sterling," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice dangerously low, "you walked into my firm, interrupted my business operations, and intentionally made false, malicious accusations regarding the professional integrity of one of my licensed accountants. Do you have any idea the legal peril you have just placed yourself in?" My mother stammered, her hands shaking as she gripped her expensive purse. We were just concerned for her well-being. We did not know what she was thinking. Making false allegations of embezzlement against a CPA to their employer is grounds for an immediate defamation lawsuit, but Reynolds interrupted his tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You attempted to destroy her livelihood to protect yourselves. Clara is one of the most meticulous, reliable, and ethical accountants in this entire building. I would trust her with my own personal finances before I trusted a single word coming out of your mouth." Julian stood up, his face flushed bright red. He grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her out of her chair. "Come on, Mom," he muttered, his eyes darting toward the door. "We do not need to sit here and be insulted. Let her lawyer talk to our lawyer." Before they could reach the glass door, Mr. Reynolds stood up from the head of the table. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the oak surface. "If either of you ever steps foot inside this building again, I will have building security arrest you for trespassing," Mr. Reynolds promised. "And if you attempt to spread these defamatory lies to any other financial institution in this city, I will personally ensure that this firm's entire legal department backs Clara in a civil suit that will drain whatever assets you have not already stolen from her. Now, get out of my office." My mother looked back at me one last time. The mask of the loving, heartbroken parent was completely shattered. Underneath, there was nothing left but raw, naked fear. She had finally realized that the daughter she had treated as invisible was actually the one holding all the power. They turned and practically fled down the hallway, rushing toward the elevator bank to escape the humiliation. I sat back in my leather chair. My hands were finally steady. My chest felt incredibly light. Brenda, the HR director, let out a long breath she seemed to have been holding for 5 minutes. Mr. Reynolds sat back down, picking up the silver USB drive and rolling it thoughtfully between his fingers. "Clara," he said softly, all the harshness gone from his voice, "I am incredibly sorry you had to endure that. No one should ever be treated that way by their own family." "Thank you for listening to me, sir," I replied. I was prepared to pack my desk. "You will do no such thing," Mr. Reynolds said firmly. "You handled an aggressive, highly manipulative ambush with total professionalism and undeniable proof. That is exactly the kind of grace under pressure I expect from my top accountants. I will have our IT department review the files on this drive, so we have an independent backup of your evidence stored on our secure servers." He leaned across the table and handed the drive back to me. Furthermore, he continued, dealing with bank fraud investigations can be incredibly complex and time-consuming. "I am putting you on administrative leave for the rest of the week with full pay. You need time to meet with your attorney and secure your assets. And Clara, if Mr. Harrison needs any forensic accounting resources to trace the funds your father stole our firm, we'll provide those services to you completely free of charge. We take care of our own." I thanked him, my voice finally thick with genuine emotion. For 26 years, I had been searching for a family that would protect me, value me, and stand up for me when things got difficult. I had spent my entire life trying to earn that protection from people who only saw me as a tool to be used. Sitting in that glass conference room, watching my boss offer the full weight of a prestigious firm to defend my honor, I realized I had finally found my people. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by the people who stand by you when the truth comes out. But the battle was far from over. My parents had tried to destroy my career, and they had failed spectacularly. Now it was my turn to cut off their oxygen. While they were fleeing my office building in absolute panic, the gears I had set in motion earlier that morning were finally clicking into place. I packed up my briefcase and walked out of the firm, ready to execute the next phase of the strategy. The golden boy and his devoted mother were about to discover exactly what happens when an accountant freezes the cash flow. I walked out of the glass doors of my accounting firm and stepped into the cool, damp Chicago air. For the first time in my 26 years of life, I was not rushing back to my apartment to balance my father's business ledgers. I was not checking my phone to see if my mother needed me to pick up her dry cleaning. I was standing on the pavement with a week of paid administrative leave and the full legal backing of a prestigious corporate firm. The heavy, suffocating fog of guilt that had always clouded my judgment was completely gone. I felt lighter than air, but I also knew my work was far from over. Defending myself against their false allegations was only the first step. It was time to go on the offensive. I walked to the parking garage and got into my 10-year-old sedan. I locked the doors and started the engine just to get the heater running. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and connected it to my mobile hotspot. I had already filed the initial fraud report with the local police department the night before, but dealing with a massive financial institution required a much more direct approach. Banks move slowly when you submit a standard customer service ticket online, but they move with terrifying speed when a licensed, certified public accountant calls their dedicated fraud investigation hotline with certified proof of a felony. I dialed the priority number I had saved in my professional contacts. After a brief hold, I was connected to a senior investigator named Robert. I introduced myself clearly and professionally. I gave him my CPA license number and my social security number to verify my identity. I told him I was calling to report a massive case of identity theft mortgage fraud and unauthorized wire transfers on an account held at his institution. Robert's tone immediately shifted from polite customer service to serious investigation. He asked for the specific account details. I gave him the account number associated with the $85,000 home equity line of credit. I explained that this line of credit was fraudulently opened against a commercial property that I solely owned. I told him that my signature on the master loan agreement had been forged by my father, Richard Sterling. As we spoke, I attached the digital files from my encrypted drive to a secure email portal Robert provided. I sent him the preliminary handwriting analysis from the independent expert. I sent him the original loan disbursement records showing the $85,000 being wired directly to a luxury auto dealership. I also sent him the audio recording of my father explicitly threatening to disown me if I did not return the original forged documents to his safe. Robert reviewed the files in real time while I waited on the line. The silence in my car felt heavy and electric. I could hear the faint clicking of his keyboard. When he finally spoke again, his voice was incredibly grim. "Miss Sterling," he said carefully. "Based on the documentation provided and your sworn statement, we are escalating this to a priority federal fraud investigation. Because the stolen funds were dispersed via wire transfer across state lines, this constitutes wire fraud. I am placing an immediate hard freeze on the home equity line of credit. We will also be initiating a forced recall of the $85,000 wire transfer from the receiving auto dealership." I thanked him, but I knew I had to push further. As an accountant, I understood exactly how financial networks operated. My father had undoubtedly linked his primary checking and savings accounts to the fraudulent line of credit to facilitate the transfer of funds. "Robert," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, "my father used his personal bank accounts at your institution as the conduit for this stolen money. He and my mother, Patricia Sterling, are joint account holders. Because they are currently under active investigation for defrauding your bank, I am requesting a complete security freeze on all connected accounts to prevent further asset depletion." There was a brief pause on the line. Then Robert confirmed exactly what I wanted to hear. Under standard banking protocols, when a primary account holder is implicated in a major fraud investigation, all linked accounts and associated credit lines sharing the same social security numbers are temporarily suspended pending review. He told me the freeze would take effect immediately. Nobody would be able to withdraw cash, make purchases, or transfer funds until the legal department concluded their inquiry. I ended the call and leaned back against the worn fabric of my car seat. The dominoes had officially been pushed. I had just severed the financial artery of the Sterling family. I put my car in gear and drove toward a quiet coffee shop to wait for the inevitable explosion. I would later learn from Julian's own frantic screams exactly how his afternoon played out. While I was sitting in my car talking to the bank investigator, my twin brother was living his absolute best life. He was driving his brand new midnight blue luxury sport utility vehicle down the scenic stretch of Lakeshore Drive. He had the windows rolled down despite the chilly air because he wanted everyone to see him. He had the premium sound system turned all the way up. He felt like the absolute king of Chicago. He felt like a brilliant, successful master of business administration who had conquered the world without ever actually working a single difficult day in his life. He was probably planning out which expensive downtown restaurant he would grace with his presence for lunch. But his victory lap was abruptly interrupted when his phone rang through the digital dashboard of his new car. The caller identification showed the name of the luxury auto dealership. Julian answered the call with a smug smile, expecting them to ask how he was enjoying the vehicle. Instead, he was greeted by the harsh, commanding voice of the dealership's general manager. The manager did not ask about the car. He informed Julian that the bank had just issued an emergency recall on the $85,000 wire transfer that funded the purchase. The bank had flagged the transaction as fraudulent. Julian tried to laugh it off. He told the manager there must be some kind of clerical error. He arrogantly explained that his father was a highly successful insurance broker and that their family had millions of dollars in assets. He promised he would call his father and have the bank clear up the misunderstanding by the end of the day. The general manager did not care about Julian's arrogant promises. He told Julian that the car was no longer his property. He ordered Julian to return the vehicle to the dealership lot immediately. If the car was not returned within 2 hours, the dealership would report the vehicle as stolen to the Chicago Police Department and press grand theft auto charges against him. The blood drained from Julian's face. His entire world of unearned luxury was suddenly collapsing. Panicking, he pulled the heavy vehicle into the nearest gas station. He grabbed his premium credit card, hoping to fill the tank and maybe buy himself some time to figure out what was happening. He walked up to the outdoor payment terminal and inserted his card. The digital screen processed for 3 seconds before flashing a bright red message. Transaction declined. Julian cursed and pulled out a different credit card. It was a joint card tied to my parents' primary accounts. He inserted it into the machine. Transaction declined. Please contact your banking institution. The golden boy of the Sterling family was standing at a dirty gas station pump holding pieces of useless plastic, realizing he did not even have enough money to buy a gallon of premium fuel. His $85,000 status symbol had just become a massive metal trap, and he had absolutely no way out. While Julian was experiencing his first taste of real-world consequences on the side of the highway, my mother was facing her own personal nightmare in the most public way possible. Patricia Sterling lived for social validation. Her entire identity was built on the perception of wealth and effortless superiority. That afternoon, she was at her exclusive country club spa, recovering from the immense stress of throwing a party and dealing with my sudden disappearance. She had spent 3 hours receiving premium massages and expensive skin treatments, complaining to the massage therapists about how ungrateful her daughter was being. When her session was over, she walked up to the marble reception desk feeling completely relaxed and superior. She was wearing her plush designer sweater and her signature pearl necklace. She chatted loudly with 2 other wealthy country club wives who were sitting in the waiting area, making sure they noticed how wonderful she looked. My mother casually handed her heavy metal credit card to the young receptionist to pay the $400 spa bill. The receptionist smiled politely and ran the card through the machine. The terminal beeped a sharp, unpleasant sound. The receptionist frowned and tried the card a second time. Another sharp beep. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Sterling," the receptionist whispered, leaning forward to keep her voice down out of respect. "It looks like this card is not going through. Do you happen to have another form of payment with you today?" My mother's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up in profound offense. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh, ensuring her wealthy friends nearby could hear her frustration. "That is absolutely ridiculous," she snapped, pulling her designer wallet back open. "Your machine must be broken. My husband just deposited a massive commission check this morning. Here, try this one." She handed the receptionist a different premium card linked directly to their primary checking account. The receptionist ran it. The machine beeped again. Declined. Account frozen. Please contact administrator. The receptionist looked at my mother with a mixture of polite apology and deep, awkward pity. I am very sorry, ma'am, the young woman said. The system says your account has been completely frozen. We cannot process any transactions. The two wealthy wives sitting in the waiting area immediately stopped talking. The silence in the luxurious spa lobby was absolute. In my mother's world, there was no greater sin than being unable to pay a bill. A declined credit card was a mark of profound social shame. It signaled financial instability. It signaled that the grand illusion was cracking. My mother's face turned a violent shade of scarlet. Her hands began to shake as she grabbed her phone from her purse. She marched over to a quiet corner of the lobby and frantically dialed my father's number. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed Julian. Straight to voicemail. She was completely isolated, standing in a room full of people she spent her entire life trying to impress, utterly unable to pay for her own luxury. She eventually had to leave her expensive diamond earrings with the spa manager as collateral, while she promised to go home and get a paper check. She walked out of that country club with her head down, humiliated, broken, and terrified. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the Sterling family had officially fallen into a localized liquidity crisis. They had a massive house filled with expensive furniture. They had closets full of designer clothes. But because of the federal fraud freeze, they did not have access to a single liquid dollar. They could not buy groceries. They could not pay for gas. They could not hire an expensive defense attorney to fight the impending lawsuit. They had built a beautiful golden cage of debt and fraud, and I had just locked the door from the outside. The panic they had tried to instill in me that morning had completely reversed direction. They were drowning, and they had no idea how deep the water was about to get. Because taking away their money was only the beginning. The real devastation was going to come when they realized they could no longer control the narrative. The text message came through on a burner number just before noon on Thursday. It contained a single address for a coffee shop in downtown Chicago and a demand that I meet him there alone at 2 o'clock. The message ended with a simple threat indicating that if I did not show up, he would make sure I spent the next 10 years in a federal prison. I knew it was Julian. My twin brother had always possessed a flair for the dramatic, but he lacked the intelligence to back it up. A smart criminal does not put extortion threats in writing. But Julian had spent his entire 26 years being shielded from the consequences of his own stupidity by our parents. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. I did not feel a single drop of fear as I read the message. I simply packed my leather briefcase, informed my office manager that I was taking an extended lunch break, and walked out into the cool afternoon air. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. It was a busy, bustling place, filled with corporate workers, the loud grinding of espresso machines, and the constant hum of overlapping conversations. It was the perfect neutral ground for a confrontation. A public place meant Julian could not raise his voice or throw a physical tantrum without drawing a crowd. I ordered a simple black tea and sat in a corner booth facing the door. I placed my briefcase on the seat beside me and waited. Julian walked through the glass doors at exactly 2 o'clock. For a moment, I almost did not recognize the golden boy of the Sterling family. The arrogant, confident swagger he had displayed at his graduation party just a few days ago was completely gone. His expensive, custom-tailored suit looked slightly rumpled as if he had slept in it. There were dark, heavy circles under his bright blue eyes, and his hair was unkempt. The freezing of the family bank accounts had clearly taken a severe toll on his beauty sleep. He spotted me in the corner booth and marched over. He did not bother ordering a drink. He simply slid into the leather seat across from me and glared. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. He was waiting for me to apologize or look intimidated. I simply took a slow, calm sip of my tea and looked at him with the clinical detachment of an auditor examining a faulty ledger. "You think you are so incredibly smart?" Clara Julian finally hissed. He leaned forward across the small wooden table, keeping his voice in a low, venomous whisper so the business people at the next table would not hear him. You think you can just press a button, freeze our money, and ruin my entire life? You think you can take away my car and humiliate Mom and Dad and just walk away clean? I set my teacup down. I did not take your car, Julian, I replied softly. The bank took their car because it was purchased with funds stolen from my commercial property. I simply reported a crime. What the police and the bank decide to do with that information is entirely out of my hands. Julian sneered. It was an ugly expression that twisted his handsome features into something cruel and desperate. He reached inside his expensive leather jacket and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. He threw it onto the center of the table with a loud smack. You are going to call the bank right now, he commanded. You are going to tell that investigator that you made a mistake. You are going to tell them that Dad had your full permission to sign that home equity loan on your behalf. You are going to drop the fraud charges and you are going to unfreeze our accounts today. I looked at the yellow envelope and then back up at his face. And why exactly would I do that, Julian? Because if you do not, I am going to destroy your precious accounting career, he said, a smug, victorious smile spreading across his face. He tapped the thick envelope with his index finger. I spent the last 2 days digging through the family business files you left behind. I looked at the corporate tax returns you prepared and filed for Dad over the last 4 years. He leaned in closer, his blue eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Dad underreported his business income by hundreds of thousands of dollars. He claimed massive fraudulent deductions, and you signed every single one of those tax returns as the official preparer. You are legally responsible, Clara. The Internal Revenue Service does not care if Dad told you to do it. You are the licensed professional. You are complicit in massive federal tax evasion. Julian sat back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked so incredibly pleased with himself. He thought he had executed a brilliant corporate maneuver. He thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner. If you do not unlock our money by 3 o'clock today, I am marching straight to the IRS field office. I will hand them these files, then I will mail a copy to the state accounting board. Your CPA license will be revoked before the end of the month, and you will be facing federal prison time for tax fraud. So go ahead, Clara. Pick up your phone and call the bank. I sat perfectly still, listening to the ambient noise of the coffee shop around us. I listened to a barista call out an order for a caramel latte. I listened to the rain tapping lightly against the large glass windows. I looked at my twin brother, the boy my parents had worshipped, the man who thought he was a financial genius. I did not feel angry. I felt profound, absolute pity. Julian, I said, keeping my voice gentle and perfectly measured. Did you honestly think you were the first person to notice those tax discrepancies? Did you really believe that a certified public accountant would spend 4 years filing fraudulent numbers without keeping a meticulous paper trail to protect herself? Julian's smug smile faltered slightly. His arms dropped from his chest. What are you talking about? He demanded. I did not touch his yellow envelope. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder of my own. I placed it on the table, right next to his blackmail material. Every time Dad forced me to alter a ledger or claim a fake deduction, I sent him an email, explicitly outlining why the deduction was illegal, I explained calmly. I sent those emails to his personal account, and I blind copied a secure external server that I own. I've written responses from Richard Sterling directly ordering me to bypass tax laws and threatening to kick me out of the house if I refuse to comply. The state board and the IRS offer full protection for whistleblowers who are coerced under threat of homelessness and abuse. I handed that entire digital archive over to my attorney, David Harrison, yesterday morning. If you go to the IRS, Julian, you will not be destroying my career. You will simply be handing them the final piece of evidence they need to put our father in a federal penitentiary for the next 20 years. The color completely drained from Julian's face. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The grand blackmail scheme he had spent 2 days constructing had just collapsed in a matter of seconds. He was not a corporate mastermind. He was a spoiled child playing a game he did not understand. But we are not here to talk about Dad's tax evasion. I continued softly pushing my manila folder across the table toward him. We are here to talk about you, Julian. You should open that folder. Julian stared at the manila folder as if it were a venomous snake. His hands were trembling visibly as he reached out and flipped open the cover. When I was unlinking my identity from the family business accounts on Saturday night, I decided to conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of the family wealth management portfolio, I said, leaning forward so he could hear every single word clearly. Mom and Dad always told me they were struggling to pay the mortgage because your Master of Business Administration program at the private university was costing them $120,000 a year in tuition. They used your expensive education as the excuse for why I had to work 3 jobs. They used it as the excuse for why they had to secretly forge my signature and mortgage my commercial townhouse. I watched Julian's eyes scan the top document in the folder. It was a certified communication from his university's financial aid office. But I am an accountant, Julian. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I know how to follow the money. Your tuition was not $120,000 a year. Your tuition was exactly $60,000 a year. Julian swallowed hard. A bead of cold sweat rolled down his temple. I tapped the second page in the folder. It was a detailed, highlighted bank ledger. Mom and Dad authorized a recurring monthly transfer from their primary retirement account directly into your personal checking account to cover what you told them were essential educational expenses. You completely drained their life savings under the guise of higher education. You siphoned an extra $60,000 a year out of our parents' retirement fund for 3 solid years. I flipped to the next page, revealing a stack of credit card statements and wire transfer receipts I had pulled from his linked accounts. You did not use that money for textbooks, Julian. I continued relentlessly, stripping away every layer of his golden boy facade. You used it to fund a luxury lifestyle you did not earn. I have the receipts right here. $5,000 for a first-class trip to Cabo San Lucas with your fraternity brothers. $12,000 for a diamond tennis bracelet you bought for your girlfriend. $18,000 in direct wire transfers to illegal offshore sports betting websites. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles were stark white. You embezzled $180,000 from your own parents. I told him the absolute truth, ringing in the air between us. You let them forge my signature and destroy my credit to buy you a luxury car because you had already bled them entirely dry. You are not a brilliant businessman, Julian. You are a thief. You are a parasite who fed on the 2 people who worshipped the ground you walked on. Please. Julian choked out, his voice barely a raw whisper. Clara, please, you cannot show this to them. It will kill Mom. It will absolutely destroy her. I sat back in my chair and looked at the terrified, broken man sitting across from me. He was not worried about our mother's health. He was worried about losing his status as the perfect son. He was terrified that the illusion he had built would finally be shattered. I did not commit tax evasion, Julian. I said, my tone offering absolutely no mercy. I was a victim of financial abuse, and I have the legal documentation to prove it. You, on the other hand, committed wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. You stole from their retirement accounts. I reached across the table and tapped the folder one last time. Here's my counteroffer, I said. You have exactly 24 hours to go back to that house and sit down with Mom and Dad. You are going to show them this exact folder. You are going to tell them exactly where their retirement money went. You are going to look our mother in the eye and confess that her perfect golden boy is a degenerate gambler and a thief. Julian shook his head frantically, tears welling up in his eyes. Clara, I cannot do that. They will hate me. They will never forgive me. If you do not confess to them by tomorrow afternoon, I replied, standing up from the booth, I will hand this entire folder over to the Financial Crimes Division of the Chicago Police Department, along with the forged home equity loan documents. I will let the federal investigators seize your bank accounts and charge you with wire fraud. I will make sure you spend your late 20s sitting in a concrete cell instead of a country club. I picked up my briefcase, leaving his pathetic blackmail envelope sitting untouched on the table. You wanted to play a financial game with an accountant, Julian, I said, looking down at him one final time. Consider yourself audited. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping back into the cool, rainy streets of Chicago. I did not look back to see if he was crying. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Julian was a coward. Faced with the threat of federal prison, he would absolutely run home and confess to save his own skin. He would turn on our parents to protect himself. The united front they had maintained to keep me oppressed was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I walked toward the train station, feeling a deep, profound satisfaction. The golden boy was about to burn his own kingdom to the ground, and I did not even have to light the match. I told Julian he had exactly 24 hours to confess to our parents, or I would hand the massive folder of his embezzlement and the forged home equity loan documents directly to the police. I walked out of that coffee shop, leaving him sitting there with his face pale and his hands shaking. I did not look back. I got into my car and drove straight back to the small, quiet hotel room I had rented on the outskirts of the city. I locked the door behind me and sat down at the small wooden desk near the window. I opened my laptop and connected to the internet. 2 years ago, my father had demanded that I install a high-end interior security camera system in their sprawling suburban home. He was deeply paranoid that the cleaning staff was stealing his expensive imported cigars and his luxury watches. Because I was the only person in the family who understood basic technology, I purchased the cameras, installed them in the main living areas, and set up the network. As the administrative user, I tied the master account to my own email address. My parents were so incredibly arrogant and technologically incompetent that they never even bothered to ask for the master password. They just assumed I would always be there to manage it for them. I logged into the secure portal and clicked on the live feed for the main living room. The high-definition camera captured the entire space perfectly. I could see the grand stone fireplace, the crystal chandeliers, and the expensive leather furniture. I turned the volume up on my laptop speakers. I wanted to see exactly how the golden child of the Sterling family was going to handle his 24-hour deadline. The living room was already thick with tension when the video feed loaded. My father, Richard, was pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug. He was holding a heavy crystal glass filled with dark scotch, and his face was flushed a deep, angry red. My mother, Patricia, was sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, gripping her phone so tightly, her knuckles were white. They were undoubtedly reeling from the complete disaster of their morning. Their accounts were frozen solid, their credit cards were declining everywhere they went, and their malicious attempt to get me fired from my accounting firm had blown up in their faces spectacularly. The heavy oak front door slammed open and Julian walked into the camera frame. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. His designer suit was wrinkled and his perfect golden hair was a mess. He did not possess his usual arrogant swagger. He looked small, weak, and entirely terrified. "Julian!" My mother cried out, standing up from the sofa. "Where have you been? We have been calling you for hours. The bank will not tell us anything, and David Harrison just sent a formal notice of representation to the house. Clara actually hired a corporate lawyer. We are completely locked out of everything." My father stopped pacing and pointed his glass at Julian. "Did you go to her firm like we discussed? Did you show those tax documents to her boss? We need leverage to force her to drop this ridiculous identity theft claim right now. If we do not get those accounts unfrozen by tomorrow, the bank is going to refer the home equity loan to their federal fraud department." Julian stood frozen in the center of the living room. He looked at our father and then at our mother. He swallowed hard, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "I met with her." Julian said, his voice trembling so much it distorted the audio on the camera feed. "I took the tax documents to the coffee shop just like we planned. I told her I would report her to the state accounting board for tax evasion if she did not call the bank and unfreeze the accounts today." My father let out a harsh sigh of relief. "Good. Finally, someone in this family does something right." What did that ungrateful little brat say? "When is she dropping the charges?" "She is not dropping anything." "Dad?" Julian replied, his voice cracking. "She laughed at me. She already gave all the tax documents to her lawyer. She kept copies of every single email you ever sent her, forcing her to alter the ledgers. She has you on record threatening to kick her out of the house if she did not falsify those deductions." She is protected under federal whistleblower laws. If we take those files to the authorities, you are the only one going to federal prison. The glass in my father's hand slipped and shattered against the hardwood floor. The sound was sharp and violent, echoing through my laptop speakers. My father stared at his son with wide, terrified eyes. His entire corporate blackmail strategy, the one he thought was so incredibly brilliant, had just evaporated into thin air. My mother let out a small, horrified gasp. "Richard, what does he mean? What emails did you send her?" "Shut up, Patricia," my father snapped, turning his panic into immediate rage. He looked back at Julian. "Fine, we will find another way. She is just trying to scare us. She is bluffing. We just need to figure out what she wants and pay her off." Julian shook his head slowly, his eyes filling with panicked tears. "We cannot pay her off, Dad. We do not have any money." "We have the retirement accounts, Julian," my father argued, stepping closer to him. "We have the emergency investment portfolios. We can liquidate them tomorrow and offer her a cash settlement to withdraw the identity fraud claim before the police show up with a warrant." Julian took a step backward, away from our father. He raised his hands defensively. "You do not understand, Dad. There is no money in the retirement accounts. There is no emergency portfolio." The living room went absolutely silent. I leaned closer to my laptop screen, watching the profound confusion wash over my parents' faces. "What are you talking about?" My mother asked, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. "We have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the primary retirement fund. We have been saving that money for 30 years, Julian." "What do you mean there is no money?" Julian looked down at his expensive leather shoes, unable to meet his mother's eyes. Clara audited the family portfolios, he confessed, his voice barely a squeak. While she was unlinking her identity from the business, she tracked all the financial statements. "She knows everything. She gave me a folder today. She gave me 24 hours to tell you the truth, or she is sending the entire file to the Financial Crimes Division." "Tell us what truth, Julian," my father roared, his face turning purple with absolute fury. "Where is my retirement money?" "I took it," Julian blurted out, squeezing his eyes shut as the tears finally spilled over his cheeks. "Over the last 3 years, I set up a recurring wire transfer from the retirement portfolio into my personal checking account. I told you, my Master of Business Administration program cost $120,000 a year, but it only cost $60,000. I took the rest. I took all of it. The accounts are completely empty." My mother collapsed backward onto the velvet sofa. She looked like she had just been shot in the chest. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just stared at the son she had worshipped her entire life, as if he had suddenly transformed into a monster right in front of her. "You stole from us!" My father whispered, his voice shaking with a rage so deep it vibrated through the microphone. "You stole your mother's future. You stole my life savings. You looked us in the eye every single day, and you bled us entirely dry." I was sitting in my quiet hotel room, watching the absolute destruction of their perfect family illusion. For my entire life, they had treated Julian like a king. They had celebrated his mediocre grades, they had bought him luxury gifts, and they had constantly reminded me that I would never be as special or as talented as he was. They believed he was destined for greatness. They believed he was a financial genius who was going to take the corporate world by storm. And now, standing in their living room, stripped of his arrogant facade, he was nothing but a common thief who had robbed his own parents blind. Julian did not fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. He did not show genuine remorse for destroying their financial security. Instead, he did exactly what entitled golden children do when they are finally backed into a corner. He violently shifted the blame. "Do not look at me like that," Julian screamed, pointing an accusing finger at our father. "You are the ones who raised me to expect this lifestyle. You're the ones who told me I had to look like a successful executive to get into the right social circles. I had to buy the first-class tickets. I had to buy the expensive jewelry for my girlfriend so she would stay with me. I had to maintain the image you demanded." "You stole our money to play pretend, you pathetic little parasite," my father shouted, taking another step toward him. "And whose fault is that?" Julian fired back, stepping right up to our father. "You want to talk about playing pretend? You live in a massive house with a second mortgage you cannot afford. You pretend to be a wealthy titan of industry while your business is secretly drowning in debt. You are a complete failure, Dad. You did not have the real money to support me, so I took what I needed to survive the pressure you put on me." My mother covered her face with her hands, sobbing loudly now. "Julian, please stop," she cried. "How could you do this to us? We gave you everything. We bought you that beautiful car just 3 days ago. We loved you so much." "You bought me a stolen car," Julian screamed, turning his wrath toward our mother. "You did not buy me anything. You and Dad committed a federal felony. You forged Clara's signature on a home equity loan because you were too broke to actually afford a graduation present. The dealership called me today. The bank canceled the wire transfer and forced me to return the car. I had to take an awful public bus back to this house because my credit cards are declining." He paced across the room, throwing his arms up in the air. "You want to call me a thief? You two committed identity fraud and mortgage fraud against your own daughter. Clara has all the original bank documents. She has your forged signature, Dad. She has the emails you sent Mom plotting how to hide the mail. If she gives that folder to the police tomorrow afternoon, we are all going to federal prison. Every single one of us." The living room fell into a horrifying, paralyzed silence. The magnitude of their situation had finally crashed down upon them. They had no money. They had no retirement. Their credit was frozen. They were facing multiple federal charges for identity theft and wire fraud, and the only person who could possibly save them was the daughter they had spent 26 years treating like absolute garbage. My mother slowly lowered her hands from her tear-stained face. She looked at Julian standing there, sweating and crying and blaming everyone but himself. Then she looked at the empty space by the door, where I used to stand quietly waiting for their instructions. I watched a profound, terrible realization wash over her features. I could see the exact moment her psychological reality completely shattered. For her entire life, Patricia Sterling had believed a lie. She believed that Julian was her brilliant, successful masterpiece, and that I was just the useless, difficult burden she was forced to tolerate. But sitting in the ruins of her living room, the truth was undeniable. Her talented golden son was a parasitic leech who had secretly hollowed out their life savings to fund his gambling and his luxury vacations. He felt no remorse. He only felt anger that the money had run out. And the useless daughter, the one she forced to park 3 blocks away, the one she ordered to clean up broken glass, the one whose professional licensing she had cruelly mocked, was the only person who had actually kept this family afloat. I was the one who had balanced their failing books. I was the one who managed their complex taxes to keep the government away. I was the one who had built a solid, honest career. And I was the one who currently held the absolute power of life and death over their entire future. My mother let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail. It was the sound of a woman mourning the death of the only thing she truly loved, which was her own perfect image. She rocked back and forth on the velvet sofa, clutching her chest. "What have we done?" she sobbed, her voice completely broken. "Richard, what have we done to her?" She was the only one who actually worked. She was the only one who actually cared about us. And we let you steal from her. We threw her away for him. She pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "You are a monster," she wept. "You are a disgusting, selfish thief, and you destroyed everything. Do not put this all on me," Julian yelled, his face twisting with panic. "You knew about the forged loan, Mom. You helped Dad hide the papers from Clara. You are just as guilty as we are." I sat in my quiet hotel room, watching the 3 of them tear each other apart like wild animals trapped in a cage. The loyalty they had always demanded from me did not exist between them. There was no love in that living room. There was only shared liability and desperate self-preservation. The minute the money stopped flowing, their perfect family facade burned straight to the ground. I reached out and closed my laptop screen, shutting off the video feed. I did not need to watch the rest of their argument. The internal betrayal was complete. I had given Julian 24 hours to confess, and he had used that time to completely obliterate whatever fragments of trust remained in the Sterling household. I walked over to the window and looked out at the rain falling steadily on the empty parking lot. My parents had built a beautiful golden cage for my brother, and they had expected me to happily act as the foundation that supported its weight. Now the foundation was gone, the cage had collapsed, and they were left standing in the wreckage of their own terrible choices. The financial ruin was secure, the emotional destruction was absolute, and tomorrow morning I was going to let my lawyer deliver the final fatal blow. The days following the absolute collapse of the Sterling family finances were strangely quiet for me. I spent my time in my modest hotel room, working remotely for my accounting firm and reviewing legal documents with my attorney, David Harrison. The federal bank investigators were moving with incredible speed. They had officially frozen every single asset tied to my parents' social security numbers. The massive home equity line of credit was locked tight, and the fraudulent $85,000 wire transfer had been entirely reversed, leaving my parents with nothing but a looming federal inquiry. You would think that a family facing multiple felony charges and complete financial ruin would hide in their house and contact a criminal defense lawyer. You would think they would cancel their social engagements and prepare for the devastating reality of bankruptcy and prison time. But that is because a normal person operates on logic and self-preservation. Narcissists operate entirely on ego. To my parents, the greatest tragedy of this entire situation was not that they had destroyed their relationship with their daughter or that they had committed a federal crime. The greatest tragedy was that their wealthy friends might find out they were broke. On Thursday morning, I received a phone call from Mrs. Gable, the retired school teacher who lived 2 doors down from my parents. She was the only person from my old life who actually cared enough to check on me. She called to make sure I was safe, and then she mentioned something that made my blood run completely cold. She told me that catering trucks and floral delivery vans were currently lined up outside the Sterling house. She said my mother had been bragging to the entire neighborhood that they were hosting a massive inauguration gala for Julian at the prestigious Oak Creek Country Club that very weekend to celebrate his fictional new executive career. I sat in my hotel room, staring at the wall in absolute disbelief. Their bank accounts were completely frozen. Their credit cards were declining at gas stations and spas. They did not have the liquid cash to buy a cup of coffee, let alone finance a $50,000 event at an elite country club. I immediately called David Harrison and told him what Mrs. Gable had said. David chuckled a low, dark sound of pure professional amusement. He told me he had just received a very interesting tip from a private investigator he had hired to monitor my father's remaining business assets. Since my father could not access traditional banking, he had resorted to desperate measures to save his public image. He had approached a very wealthy, very shady real estate developer from his country club circle and taken out a massive high-interest personal loan. He had promised the man a ridiculous return on investment within 30 days, claiming he was just waiting for a large corporate commission check to clear. He was borrowing money from dangerous people at extortionate rates just to buy imported champagne and roasted tenderloin for people who did not actually care about him. They are throwing a party on the deck of the Titanic while the ship is actively sinking, David told me over the phone. They are so desperate to prove to their social circle that everything is fine that they are digging a hole they will never be able to climb out of. I looked down at the polished wooden desk in my hotel room. My parents were throwing a gala to celebrate the golden child. The same golden child who had just confessed to stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from their retirement accounts. The delusion was so thick, it was almost suffocating. They were willing to sacrifice their last shred of dignity just to maintain the illusion of the perfect Sterling family. David asked me if I wanted to wait until Monday to have the process server deliver the civil lawsuit documents to their house. I thought about the decades I had spent standing in the shadows of country club ballrooms, holding heavy silver trays of champagne, while my parents ignored my existence. I thought about how my mother had ordered me to clean up broken glass on the patio while Julian laughed at me. No, I told David, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. We are not waiting until Monday. We are going to serve them the papers on Saturday night. We are going to serve them right in the middle of the Oak Creek Country Club Gala. David agreed without a second of hesitation. He told me he would personally accompany the process server to ensure the delivery was legally ironclad. Saturday evening arrived with a cool, crisp breeze blowing off Lake Michigan. I did not put on a plain black serving dress. I did not pull my hair back into a tight, invisible bun. I went to a high-end boutique downtown and spent my own hard-earned money on a perfectly tailored sharp navy blue business suit. I wore a crisp white silk blouse underneath and a pair of professional black heels. I looked exactly like what I was, which was a highly successful, licensed, certified public accountant who was entirely in control of her own life. I drove to the Oak Creek Country Club and parked my car. David Harrison met me near the grand entrance. He was wearing an immaculate charcoal gray suit, carrying a thick black leather briefcase. He looked like a grim reaper for white-collar criminals. We walked up the wide stone steps together. The country club was a sprawling, opulent building with massive white columns and a fleet of luxury cars parked out front by the valet service. We walked through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the main ballroom. The room was breathtakingly beautiful and entirely fake. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over 75 well-dressed guests. A string quartet was playing soft classical music in the corner. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated through the room, carrying trays of expensive imported caviar and top-shelf champagne. It was a perfect replica of the graduation party from a week ago, but this time the stakes were incredibly different. I scanned the room and spotted my family immediately. They were standing near the center of the ballroom, holding court with a group of my father's most important business partners and investors. My father was wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch, laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. He looked completely relaxed, projecting the image of a wealthy titan of industry without a care in the world. My mother was standing beside him wearing a stunning emerald green evening gown dripping in diamonds that she had probably promised as collateral for the shady loan. She was beaming with that familiar, arrogant pride. And Julian was standing right between them, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, holding a champagne flute, looking incredibly handsome and entirely hollow. He kept glancing nervously toward the doors, as if he expected the police to storm in at any moment. He knew the truth. He knew the money was gone, and he knew this entire party was a pathetic lie. David and I walked slowly across the ballroom floor. We did not rush. We did not look angry. We walked with the calm, deliberate pace of people who hold all the cards. A few guests noticed me as we passed. Some of them frowned in confusion, trying to place my face. They were used to seeing me in a black uniform serving their food. They were not used to seeing me walking confidently through their elite social space in a power suit next to a high-powered corporate attorney. We reached the center of the room. My father was right in the middle of telling a story to a very wealthy local real estate developer named Mr. Vance. My father was bragging about a new massive insurance contract he was supposedly closing next week. "Hello, Richard," I said quietly. My voice was not loud, but it cut cleanly through the chatter of the ballroom. My father stopped speaking instantly. He turned around, his crystal glass freezing halfway to his mouth. His eyes widened in absolute shock as he registered my presence. He looked at my tailored suit, and then he looked at the imposing presence of David Harrison standing right beside me. The jovial, confident mask he was wearing slipped completely off his face, revealing the terrified, desperate man underneath. My mother gasped, her hand flying up to cover her chest. She took a step backward, bumping into Julian. Julian just stared at me, his face turning the color of wet ash. "Clara," my father managed to say, his voice tight and incredibly strained. "What are you doing here? This is a private event." "I know it is a private event," I replied, my tone perfectly level and polite. "But considering you forged my signature to secure a massive line of credit against my commercial property to pay for this lifestyle, I figured I had every right to attend." The silence that fell over their small circle of business partners was immediate and deafening. Mr. Vance, the real estate developer, raised his eyebrows and took a very slow, deliberate step away from my father. The two other corporate investors standing nearby exchanged sharp, concerned looks. In their world, financial fraud was not just a crime, it was a highly contagious disease, and nobody wanted to be standing too close to the infected. My mother panicked. She tried to deploy her usual tactic of aggressive gaslighting. "Clara, please," she said, forcing a strained, hysterical laugh. "Stop making these ridiculous scenes. You are clearly unwell. We will talk about your mental health issues at home, Please excuse our daughter, gentlemen. She is going through a very difficult manic phase right now. I did not react to her insults. I did not feel the familiar sting of humiliation that used to paralyze me whenever she mocked me in public. I just looked at her with pure clinical detachment. I am not unwell, Patricia, I said calmly, using her first name instead of calling her mom. And we will not be talking at home because I no longer live there. We will only be talking through legal representation from now on. I stepped aside and allowed David Harrison to take the lead. David opened his black leather briefcase with a sharp snapping sound that echoed in the quiet space. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, securely bound with a blue legal cover. Richard and Patricia Sterling. David said, his voice projecting a deep, authoritative rumble that commanded the attention of everyone standing within 20 feet. I am David Harrison, senior partner at Harrison and Vance Litigation. I've been retained as primary counsel by Clara Sterling. You are being officially served with notice of a civil lawsuit for identity theft, mortgage fraud, financial exploitation, and severe breach of fiduciary duty. David held the thick stack of papers out toward my father. My father did not move. He stood completely frozen, staring at the documents as if they were covered in poison. His hands were shaking so badly that the ice in his Scotch glass clinked loudly against the crystal. Take the documents, Mr. Sterling David instructed, his tone dropping to a dangerously low register. Or I will drop them at your feet in front of your guests and consider you legally served. My father slowly reached out and took the papers. His face was gray. He looked like a man who was watching his entire life burn to the ground. A secondary copy has already been filed with the Federal Financial Crimes Division and the primary fraud investigators at your bank. David continued, ensuring his voice was clear enough for Mr. Vance and the other business partners to hear every single word. The preliminary handwriting analysis confirming the forgery of Miss Sterling's signature has been attached as Exhibit A. The ledgers detailing your unauthorized withdrawals of $85,000 have been attached as Exhibit B. My mother let out a small, terrified sob. She looked around at her wealthy friends, desperately searching for sympathy or support. She found absolutely nothing. The women who usually complimented her jewelry were actively turning their backs, pretending not to notice her. The men who did business with my father were quietly stepping away, putting physical distance between themselves and a man who was about to be federally indicted for stealing from his own daughter. Julian stepped forward, trying to salvage whatever tiny scrap of dignity the family had left. "Clara, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You cannot do this here. You are ruining everything." I looked at my twin brother. I looked at the boy who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from our parents' retirement accounts, leaving them completely destitute and desperate enough to commit a felony just to keep up appearances. "I did not ruin anything, Julian," I said, my voice soft but incredibly sharp. "You ruined yourselves. You built a house of cards on top of my credit score, and now the wind is blowing." I turned my attention back to my father, who was staring blankly at the first page of the civil lawsuit. "You told me to come home and fulfill my duty to this family," I told him, echoing the threatening voicemail he had left me just a few days ago. "My duty is to tell the truth. My duty is to protect my own future. You are not my family, Richard. You are just a man who tried to steal my life. Consider this my official resignation from the Sterling household." I did not wait for a response. I did not stand there and gloat. I simply turned around and walked away. David Harrison walked right beside me, his heavy leather briefcase swinging slightly with each step. We walked back through the grand ballroom past the crystal chandeliers and the string quartet. The soft classical music was still playing, completely ignorant of the absolute devastation that had just occurred in the center of the room. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea, allowing us to walk straight to the glass exit doors without a single person saying a word to us. When we stepped out into the cool evening air, I took a deep breath. My lungs felt incredibly clear. I had spent my entire life feeling like a ghost in that world, fetching napkins and pouring drinks and hiding my own achievements so I would not upset the delicate balance of my parents' egos. But tonight, I had walked into their most sacred space, not as a servant, but as an absolute force of justice. They had tried to throw a party to celebrate a lie. I had simply delivered the truth. And the truth was the one thing the Sterling family could absolutely not afford. My mother stood trembling in the center of the country club ballroom. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. The silence in the room was absolute and incredibly heavy. 75 pairs of eyes were fixed directly on the Sterling family. Patricia tried to gather whatever shattered pieces of her pride she could find. She forced a wet, trembling smile onto her face and took a hesitant step toward me. She reached out her manicured hand as if she wanted to pull me into a warm embrace. "Clara, darling," she cooed. Her voice was dripping with fake honey and manufactured heartbreak. "Why on earth would you do this to your family? We love you so much. Whatever misunderstanding we have, we can fix it privately. You do not need to humiliate your father and me like this in front of our dear friends. You are just confused right now. Let us take you home so we can talk about this." It was a brilliant performance. It was the exact same script she had used my entire life. Make me the problem. Make me the confused, sick child who needed to be managed and hidden away. Play the role of the tragic, loving mother who is just trying to protect her unstable daughter. A few days ago, that tone would have triggered a deep, desperate panic inside my chest. I would have folded into myself, apologized, and quietly followed her out the door just to keep the peace. But I did not shrink back. I stood my ground in my sharp navy blue suit and looked at the woman who had birthed me. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical clarity. "I am not confused, Patricia," I replied, my voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet room. "And I am certainly not going home with the people who stole my identity to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. I did not humiliate you. I am simply holding up a mirror so everyone else can see exactly who you are." My father tried to intervene. The red flush of anger crept up his neck as he pointed a shaking finger at my attorney, David Harrison. "You cannot just walk into a private gala and hurl baseless accusations," Richard shouted, trying to project his usual country club authority. "You have no proof of anything. This is a civil matter, and my corporate lawyers will tear you apart in court. You are trespassing, and I want you out of this building immediately." David Harrison did not even flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply stepped aside and gestured to a man who had walked into the ballroom right behind us. The man was wearing a sharp gray suit and holding a thick leather briefcase. He had stood quietly in the shadows, observing the entire interaction until this exact moment. "I would like to introduce you to someone, Richard," I said, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. "This is Mr. Robert Jenkins. He is a senior fraud investigator for the primary financial institution that holds all of your personal and corporate accounts." The color completely drained from my father's face. He looked like he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. The glass of expensive scotch in his hand tilted, spilling amber liquid onto the polished hardwood floor. Robert Jenkins stepped forward into the warm light of the crystal chandeliers. Mr. Sterling, the investigator, said, his voice firm and completely void of emotion. "We received a direct report of identity theft and unauthorized mortgage origination regarding the commercial property owned by your daughter, Clara Sterling. Our internal audit team spent the last 48 hours reviewing the origination documents, the wire transfers, and the preliminary handwriting analysis provided by independent experts. We have concluded that the signature on the master loan agreement was indeed a forgery." The crowd of wealthy guests collectively gasped. Several women clutched their evening bags, exchanging shocked whispers. Mr. Vance, the prominent real estate developer who my father had been trying to impress, shook his head in absolute disgust. As a result of this major breach, Robert Jenkins continued his tone, echoing with absolute legal finality. "All of your connected bank accounts, lines of credit, and investment portfolios have been permanently frozen. The $85,000 wire transfer used to purchase the luxury vehicle has been flagged as fraudulent and recalled. The commercial townhouse listed as collateral will be entering immediate foreclosure proceedings to recuperate the stolen funds since the loan is in default." I swallowed hard when he said that. Losing my grandfather's commercial building was the price I had to pay to expose their crime. It was a painful sacrifice, but it was entirely necessary. I had to let the bank take the building to prove I had no part in the fraudulent loan. It was the absolute destruction of their safety net and mine, but I knew I could rebuild my life. They could not. Mr. Jenkins adjusted his glasses and delivered the final crushing blow. We are formally turning our entire investigative file over to the state authorities and the Federal Financial Crimes Division. You will be receiving formal notification of criminal charges in the coming days. The bank will pursue maximum prosecution for wire fraud and identity theft. My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail. She grabbed my father's arm, digging her manicured nails into his tuxedo jacket. "Richard, tell them it is a lie," she sobbed loudly, trying to project her voice to the guests. "Tell them we have the money. We are the Sterlings. We do not commit fraud. Tell them to leave us alone." But my father could not speak. He was staring at the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. He knew it was over. The game was up. The golden cage had been blown wide open, and the entire world was watching it burn. Before my mother could continue her hysterical performance, a loud commotion erupted near the grand entrance of the country club. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the young head valet rushed into the ballroom. He looked frantic, completely out of breath, and his uniform was slightly rumpled. He scanned the room and locked eyes with Julian. "Mr. Sterling," the valet shouted, ignoring the tense, silent atmosphere of the room. "You need to come outside right now. There is a commercial tow truck in the driveway, and the driver is hooking up your new BMW." I tried to stop him, but he has legal paperwork from the finance company saying the car was reported stolen due to a fraudulent wire transfer. Julian let out a strangled, pathetic cry. He dropped his expensive champagne flute onto the polished hardwood floor. The crystal shattered into a dozen pieces, mirroring the exact mess he had made on our patio just a few weeks ago. But this time, there was no invisible sister to clean it up for him. Julian pushed past the wealthy guests and sprinted toward the massive bay windows that overlooked the circular driveway. The entire crowd shifted, following his movement with morbid curiosity. My parents stumbled over to the glass, pressing their hands against the panes. I stood perfectly still, next to my lawyer, watching the final act of their tragedy unfold. Outside, under the bright security lights, a heavy-duty commercial tow truck was currently lifting the midnight blue BMW SUV off the pavement. The massive silver graduation bow that my mother had so proudly attached to the roof was still there, fluttering sadly in the cool night breeze. The flashing yellow lights of the tow truck illuminated the dark driveway, casting long, harsh shadows across the country club lawn. Julian banged his fists violently against the thick glass window, screaming at the tow truck driver, who could not even hear him. "Stop!" Julian yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. "That is my car. You cannot take my car. I am an executive. I need that car." But the driver simply secured the heavy metal chains, climbed into the cab, and drove away, pulling the $85,000 symbol of Julian's unearned arrogance out of the country club driveway and down the dark road. The car was gone. The fraudulent money was gone. The reputation they had literally sold my soul to protect was completely obliterated. Julian slowly turned away from the window. His face was twisted into an ugly mask of rage, terror, and profound humiliation. He looked at the 75 wealthy guests who were watching him with a mixture of pity and severe judgment. Then he looked at our parents. The golden boy, the son who could do no wrong, the genius who was supposedly destined for greatness, completely cracked under the pressure of reality. "You ruined my life," Julian screamed, pointing an accusing finger directly at our father. "You told me the car was paid for. You told me we were rich and powerful. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic fraud. You stole from your own daughter and you let me take the public fall for it. Everyone in this room knows exactly what you are now." My mother reached out toward him, crying hysterically. "Julian, please, darling, do not say these things. We did it all for you. Everything we did was for you." "Do not touch me," Julian snapped, slapping her hand away with a vicious motion. "You are just as guilty as he is. You covered it up. You lied to everyone. I am never speaking to either of you again. You disgust me." Julian did not wait for a response. He did not look at me. He stormed out of the ballroom, pushing violently past the confused valet and disappearing into the night without a single penny to his name. He was finally facing the real world entirely on his own, without his parents' stolen money to protect him. My mother let out a horrific, agonizing scream as she watched her golden child abandon her. She turned back to the room, desperately seeking any friendly face to validate her existence. She looked at Mrs. Vance, a woman she had played tennis with every single Tuesday for over a decade. "Please," my mother begged, her voice trembling as she clasped her hands together. "It is all a terrible mistake. You know us. We are good people. We are your friends." Mrs. Vance did not say a single word. She simply adjusted her expensive designer shawl, picked up her clutch, turned her back on my mother, and walked straight toward the exit. Her husband, Mr. Vance, followed right behind her, giving my father one final look of absolute, unadulterated contempt. It was exactly like a dam breaking. One by one, the insurance brokers, the real estate developers, the country club, socialites, and the business partners placed their champagne glasses on the nearest tables and walked out. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer any sympathy. They did not even look at my parents as they passed. In their circles, financial ruin was bad, but stealing from your own child and getting caught was entirely unforgivable. Within 5 minutes, the grand, beautiful ballroom was completely empty, except for me, David Harrison, the bank investigator, and my devastated parents. The high society facade was stripped entirely bare, leaving nothing but the ugly truth exposed under the crystal chandeliers. My mother looked at the empty room, at the abandoned, half-full glasses, at the quiet string quartet, hastily packing up their instruments in the corner. The reality of her new life finally hit her with the force of a freight train. She had lost her precious social standing. She had lost her massive house. She had lost her golden child, who had just publicly disowned her. And she was about to lose her freedom. Her knees literally buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor, weeping uncontrollably into her hands, her expensive diamond jewelry suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous against her profound despair. My father did not try to comfort her. He did not reach down to help her up. He stood perfectly still, staring blankly at the legal documents David Harrison had forced into his hands. He was a broken, defeated man who had traded his soul and his daughter for an illusion of wealth that did not even last a full week. I looked at them both and felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace wash over my entire body. I had spent 26 years trying to earn a seat at their table. I had bent myself into smaller and smaller shapes. I had swallowed my hurt, apologized for having feelings, and stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I had genuinely believed that if I worked hard enough and stayed useful enough, they would eventually love me. But standing in the absolute ruins of their fake empire, I finally understood the truth. Their love was never a prize worth winning. It was a transaction. It was conditional upon my silence and my compliance. And the moment I refused to be their victim, I became their enemy. I turned to David Harrison and the bank investigator. "We are done here," I said quietly. I did not say another word to my parents. I did not gloat or scream or demand an apology because I knew an apology from them would be completely meaningless. I turned on my heel, the sound of my professional shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, and walked out of the ballroom. I walked out of the country club, out of the shadows, and out of their lives forever, leaving the Sterling family drowning in the exact nightmare they had so carefully created for themselves. 6 months later, the heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung open, and I stepped out into the crisp morning air. For the first time in my life, I felt the pure warmth of absolute freedom wash completely over my entire body. I was holding a finalized court order signed by a federal judge. The ruling officially declared me a victim of identity theft. It severed my name from the fraudulent home equity line of credit my parents had taken out against my commercial property. The bank dropped all claims, shifting the crushing weight of the debt directly onto Richard and Patricia Sterling. Walking down those concrete steps in my tailored navy blue suit, I took a deep breath and let 26 years of suffocating anxiety leave my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. I had fought a brutal legal battle to clear my professional name, and I had won. My parents had tried to destroy my livelihood by marching into my accounting firm and painting me as a thief. They honestly thought the state board would strip my credentials and leave me begging them for support. Instead, my meticulous documentation saved my career. Because I gathered undeniable proof and blew the whistle myself, the state board completely cleared me of all ethical violations. My boss, Mr. Reynolds, stood rigidly by me through the entire process, providing excellent corporate legal counsel. The experience of defending my own life showed me exactly what I was truly capable of doing. A month ago, I signed a commercial lease and successfully opened Clara Sterling Financial Consulting. I built a private practice entirely dedicated to forensic accounting and protecting vulnerable clients from white-collar exploitation. When I look at the gold lettering on my office door, I see a powerful, independent woman who audited her abusers and completely won. Without my pristine credit score to hold their crumbling empire together, my parents completely imploded. Their massive suburban mansion went into immediate foreclosure. The bank seized absolutely everything to satisfy the outstanding debts. My mother and father were forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom rented apartment in a neighborhood my mother used to openly mock. Patricia Sterling now has to explicitly clip coupons just to afford basic groceries. Their wealthy friends permanently blocked their numbers. They are entirely alone, living quietly in the exact poverty they always feared. The golden child who thought he was untouchable finally collided terribly with the real world. During the federal investigation, the authorities uncovered the extensive money trail of his blatant embezzlement. The police traced the stolen retirement funds and the illegal offshore sports betting wires right back to Julian. Because he used university financial systems to launder the diverted funds, his college launched an internal ethics probe. The university formally stripped Julian of his Master of Business Administration degree, citing severe ethical violations and direct involvement in a major financial felony. He immediately lost the executive job he had been bragging about. He lost his girlfriend, who only wanted him for his money. The golden boy is currently working a minimum wage retail job, trying to pay off hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Justice is rarely swift, but when it finally arrives, it leaves no stone unturned. My parents spent decades caring only about their public image, completely ignoring the daughter standing right in front of them. Now their legacy is a public, cautionary tale, while my legacy is built on absolute truth. The golden child is no longer golden, and the invisible child is standing directly in the light. Yesterday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller identification showed a number I had not seen in months. I let it go directly to voicemail. "Clara, please." Julian begged, his voice sounding incredibly small and entirely desperate through the speaker. "Mom is sick and Dad cannot find a job. We have nothing left. We are so sorry for everything. Please, just talk to us. We are your family." I sat in my beautiful office listening to a grown man crying because his golden cage had finally rusted away. For 26 years, a voicemail like that would have sent me rushing back to save them because I truly believed that blood demanded endless, unconditional loyalty. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. I did not text back. I did not call. Instead, I locked my office and walked straight to the nearest mobile phone store. I permanently changed my phone number entirely, closing the final door and locking them in the absolute ruins they had built. I learned the hardest way possible that family is not defined by the people who share your bloodline. Blood does not give anyone the right to deliberately steal your future or treat you like a servant. Real family is about mutual respect. It is about choosing to love yourself enough to respectfully walk away from anyone who asks you to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. If you are watching this and you have ever been the invisible child, or the one explicitly expected to sacrifice everything for people who give you nothing, I want you to clearly know something important. You do not have to stay. You are entirely allowed to gather your evidence and walk out the door. Setting a boundary to effectively protect your own life is an absolute act of survival. You absolutely deserve to be the main character of your own story. Thank you much for staying with me until the end of this journey. If my story gave you courage to stand up to toxic people in your life, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps these stories directly reach people who need them most. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment. Remember, you define your own worth. Take care, and I will see you in the next story. I often sit at my desk in my new consulting firm and look out the window at the bustling city below. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the glass, and I almost do not recognize the woman staring back at me. The exhausted, invisible girl who used to carry silver serving trays through a crowded ballroom is entirely gone. In her place stands a woman who finally understands the true meaning of the word family. We are taught from a very young age that blood is thicker than water. Society conditions us to believe that family loyalty requires endless sacrifice. We are told to keep the peace, to swallow our pride, and to turn the other cheek when our relatives hurt us. I spent 26 years believing that toxic narrative. I honestly thought that if I just gave a little more of my time, my energy, and my skills, my parents would eventually see my worth. I thought my silent compliance was an act of love, but to them, it was simply a green light to take everything I had. I know there are people listening to this right now who have spent decades carrying the incredibly heavy weight of an ungrateful family. You have probably washed the dishes, paid the bills, and smiled through profound disrespect because you were raised to believe that keeping the peace was your absolute duty. You might be in your 50s or 60s right now, still waiting for that one moment of genuine appreciation from the people who continuously take you for granted. You might be hoping that if you just fix one more of their mistakes, they will finally love you the way you deserve to be loved. Let me save you the agonizing wait. That moment is never going to come. People who view you as an appliance do not suddenly wake up one morning and decide to respect you. They only respect the firm boundaries you enforce. It is a terrifying thing to realize that the people who share your last name do not have your best interests at heart. When you finally stop being useful to a narcissist, they will instinctively try to convince the world that you are crazy. My own parents tried to destroy my professional license and my entire livelihood just to cover up their own incredible greed. They looked at their own flesh and blood and saw nothing but a human shield for my brother. When I finally walked away and stopped the cash flow, they called me a traitor. They tried to use guilt to drag me back into my designated corner. But walking away from abuse is never a betrayal. It is a profound act of self-preservation. True independence is not just about having your own bank account or a successful career. True independence is about waking up in the morning and knowing that your peace of mind is no longer tied to someone else's unpredictable ego. I used to continuously measure my worth by how useful I was to my father and my mother. Today, I measure my worth by the quiet, honest life I have built with my own two hands. The silence in my home used to feel incredibly lonely because I was so used to the constant chaotic demands of my family. Now that silence feels like a hard-won sanctuary. I do not have to clean up my brother's shattered crystal glasses anymore. I do not have to hide my professional accomplishments just to make him feel tall. I am completely free to be exactly who I am. Society loves to tell us that we must forgive and forget in order to heal. People who have never experienced this kind of deliberate financial and emotional betrayal will easily tell you that holding on to anger is toxic. But I am not angry anymore. Anger takes too much energy. I am simply awake. Forgiveness does not mean allowing someone back into your home to steal from you a second time. You can fully forgive someone from a very safe distance. You can wish them well while firmly locking the doors behind them. My parents and my brother are living in the exact reality they created for themselves. I did not ruin their lives or strip them of their wealth. Their own incredible arrogance did that. They built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and they expected me to hold it up forever. Dropping my hands was the healthiest thing I have ever done. It takes an immense amount of courage to look at your family and realize they are the villains in your story. It takes even more courage to pack your bags and leave the only life you have ever known. But the peace you will find on the other side of that door is worth every single ounce of the pain it takes to get there. You will discover strengths you never knew you had. You will build a life that no one can ever forge a signature to steal from you again. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. You have the absolute right to protect yourself. It does not matter if the person hurting you is your parent, your sibling, or your spouse. Evil is evil, even when it shares your bloodline. You do not owe your future to someone who actively tries to destroy your present. You are allowed to gather your evidence pack, your bags, and step into the light. You are allowed to be the main character of your own life. If you have ever been the one taking the hit in your own family, remember that you are not alone. Boundaries aren't a betrayal, they are self-protection. Please hit like and subscribe to the channel if this story gives you strength. What state are you watching from, and what time is it? Leave a comment below so we can share together.